Chapter 6. How Civil War is being fomented in America.
The civilizational war would greatly benefit global anti-cultism on its path to global totalitarianism. However, let's return to the facts that reflect the harsh reality of today. Now, facts indicate that anti-cult representatives have already brought the United States to the brink of a civil war, which can completely destroy our country. To implement its plans, global anti-cultism needs to divide American society into two camps and radicalize them against each other. One tool for this division is the activity of anti-cultists in the U.S. Anti-cultists use Nazi methods to maximize the conflict in American society. I'll give you just one example among many. You already know about Stephen Hessen, the deprogrammer who combats dissent by labeling as cultist people with different ideologies, or whoever is supposed to be stigmatized at the moment. So, Hessen has gone even further by declaring Donald Trump a cult leader and his supporters as cult members. Hessen published a book titled The Cult of Trump, where he claims that every American who supports Donald Trump is a cult member, meaning they are not free in their opinions, not independent individuals, but rather people who need to be subjected to intervention, as Hessen puts it, or in other words, they should be forced to change their beliefs. By actively promoting this book and the whole idea in the media, Hessen uses labeling to dehumanize one part of the population in the eyes of another. This leads American society to see one group of Americans not as people with different opinions, but as brainwashed zombies incapable of constructive dialogue. After all, it's much easier to take up arms against a group of people who have lost their human nature. And it's no coincidence that dehumanization was always considered the first tool of Nazi propaganda during the war. Because in order to get people to take up arms against each other, you first need to make them stop seeing each other as fellow humans.
Stephen Hessen spreads these destructive narratives with the help of his friend and media ally, Dave Troy. Troy calls himself an investigative journalist, but has never received formal training. Like Hessen, he actively disseminates stigmatizing and dehumanizing ideas about various religious and secular groups. Almost every article Troy writes is an information terrorist attack, and many of his readers actually notice that. Thus, commenting on media materials created by Dave Troy, readers point out that his rhetoric sows moral panic, causes depression, and harms their mental health. Hessen and Troy do not hide their connections. They actively supported the release of a book by anti-cultist Alex Alvarova from the Czech Republic, a country that is one of the centers of anti-cultism in Europe. In her book, Feeding the Demons, the Conquerors of America, Alvarova essentially continues to promote Hassan's and Russian Racier's narrative that tens of millions of American citizens are cult members, urging other Americans to fight them.
The destructive activities of anti-cultists have already led to the point when in our democratic United States, where people are guaranteed freedom of speech, Trump supporters are afraid to express their support openly, fearing open aggression. I highlight this not because they represent a particular party or support a specific politician, but because they are Americans, residents of a free country, who have a guaranteed freedom of speech and expression by the Constitution. It's important to remember that anti-cultism does not support any political party, force, or country. Anti-cultism hates the U.S. and is only interested in exacerbating conflicts within American society to the point of its destruction in a civil war. To achieve this, it infiltrates both opposing parties, fueling hostility. Therefore, in the opposing political camp, anti-cultism also infects citizens with Nazi narratives. It is precisely anti-cultists who heavily propagate in the media this narrative that all Democratic Party supporters are supposedly against Christianity, that they are anti-Christians, that President Biden betrayed Christianity and is destroying it. Thus, It is instilled in people that Christianity is threatened and persecuted because of the actions of this part of Americans. Consequently, according to this logic, citizens are urged to make every effort to protect Christianity from those who may destroy it, in their opinion. And again, we see the Nazi method of labeling specific groups, which is imposed by anti-cultists. Thus, the anti-cult movement exploits the existing division into two political camps in American society, stirring even greater hatred between them. All of this has led to an unprecedentedly high likelihood of a civil war. Once I already warned you that long-term consequences of party divisions can be dangerous for the nation's welfare. Back then, I said, however, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely, in the course of time and things, to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Everything I warned you about is already happening in our United States of America today. In order to achieve its goals, global anti-cultism divides you Americans, creating conditions for a new civil war in the USA. As much as American society is divided nowadays, it was only divided before the war between the North and the South, and you yourselves can see and feel that. Many citizens have already started talking about the inevitability of a civil war.
Civil war.
Civil war. Civil war.
Civil war.
Civil war.
Civil war.
And such narratives are increasingly heard from the media. This situation is a direct outcome of the actions of numerous branches of global anti-cultism and their agents, infiltrating the social and political spheres of America's life. In this war, information terrorist attacks and real acts of terrorism they provoke remain the customary tool of the hidden enemy of democracy and the entire free world. Today, I'll give you several examples of specific phenomena, events and their consequences that were orchestrated by representatives of global anti-cultism and their loyal anti-cultist dogs in order to create and intensify a split in American society, to prepare a ground for a future civil war, and to place all the pieces they need on the chessboard. Only if you realize how you've been manipulated all this time will you be able to get out of this game and gain an opportunity to take a free step, a step that will really help put an end to the entire chaos, evil, and destruction that representatives of anti-cultism sow around themselves. Then you will finally be able to find ways to achieve reconciliation and unity.
Mass shootings in schools.
It is time to expose yet another brutal and cynical atrocity committed by the international network of terrorist anti-cult groups and their ideological mentors. It is difficult to imagine that these very criminals turned out to be the architects of one of the most terrifying phenomena in modern society.
Oh my God!
A shooting at a high school in Broward County.
Mass shooting inside an elementary school.
The shooting there at the Covenant School.
Shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Deadliest shooting in U.S. history.
Worst ever mass shootings.
14 students.
At least 17 people have been killed.
27 victims, 20 children, 7 adults.
33 dead, 29 wounded.
A total of 15 people are believed to have died here, 12 students.
3 young children dead and 3 administrators dead as well.
The phenomenon I am referring to is mass shootings in educational institutions. Not long ago, the entire human community was shocked by the first such incident and wondered how it was even possible. Now, it has become a harsh reality. These incidents leave an indelible mark on people's memories. The most terrifying aspect of these violent outbursts is not just the loss of young lives, but the fact that children are killing other children. What has happened to society to give rise to such a phenomenon? What has changed, and what is the root cause of this tragic reality? A wise person once said, "For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong." In this case, many of you might be satisfied with an answer that seems obvious and straightforward, that this phenomenon has become possible because modern society is experiencing a decline in morality. People have become disconnected, and there is too much anger and violence, which has inevitably affected your children. This seems like a logical answer, and there is, of course, some truth to it. However, this is such a sharp and painful topic that it has not gone unnoticed by opportunists who are accustomed to profiting from others' misfortunes. Moreover, too many inconsistencies and unanswered questions emerge when examining each case individually and the overall picture in detail. It is as if someone may be deliberately using these tragic incidents so that while your mind is clouded by emotions of grief, shock, and loss, the actual beneficiaries of these events can covertly carry out their plans. The explanation lies in a simple and timeless formula. Find who benefits from it, and you will uncover the truth. Historically, educational institutions have always had many individuals who fit the risk factors for becoming potential shooters. However, for various reasons, only a few, and not always the most obvious ones, resorted to gun violence. The open question remains: why have developed countries faced the phenomenon of mass shootings by children in the modern era? Yes, with the invention of firearms and their gradual availability to civilians, such incidents have occurred since the early 18th century. And typically, these incidents didn't garner as much widespread attention and mass publicity in society as they do now. News reports covering these events didn't employ manipulative psychological techniques. They simply reported the facts, informed the public, and nothing more. But what's happening now is an unprecedented phenomenon. The sharp, rapid increase in armed attacks in schools worldwide occurred roughly around the same time, starting from the late 90s, with a frightening trend towards escalation since the early 2000s. In other words, school shootings have been a phenomenon of the past 30 years. Just as many years ago, the hidden force behind global anti-cultism began to regain its strength. It was then that they founded the ideological center of the modern network of anti-cult groups, and it was then that they began to consolidate their positions and spread their destructive influence massively in democratic countries around the world. And this is not just a coincidence, that's a fact. For those who think such events can't be artificially provoked, I suggest taking a closer look. Follow my train of thought, and don't just look at the surface, but try to penetrate with your gaze into the depths of things.
Armed attacks in educational institutions or school shootings. The use of armed violence on the grounds of educational institutions, primarily targeting students, often escalating into mass murders. At this point, a vast number of countries have already experienced cases of school shootings. This is an international issue being addressed by specialists from various fields. It is generally accepted that such actions by minors are driven not only by aggressive behavior, but also by a complex set of circumstances developing over a long period of time. Those can include individual vulnerability of a specific child in particular situations. For example, chronically tense relationships in the classroom or school, bullying, neglectful attitude in the family, unrecognized prolonged depressive state, and psychological problems. Thus, as some experts believe, the reason for the crime becomes the fact that the teenager, unable to cope with the situation, explodes, reacting to it with aggressive actions. However, specialists' attempts to conduct detailed analyses of dozens of cases have hit a dead end. They report that there is no single, universal profile of a shooter. Age, gender, race, and social characteristics all vary. Potential shooters are usually portrayed as unsociable, quiet loners. But studies have shown that only about 12% of them had no friends, and about 34% were considered socially isolated, which is higher than the average for their age group, but not enough to identify a significant trend. About 44% of attackers were involved in social activities outside school, such as sports teams, hobby clubs, extracurricular education, and religious groups. More than 63% of attackers came from intact families and did not have academic problems. In many cases, future shooters came from relatively well-off families where parents tried to build trusting relationships with their children. In the US, the schools that were attacked were located in suburban or rural areas with low rates of violent crime. This contrasts with Russia, where the most notorious school attacks occurred in cities: Moscow, Kazan, Kerch, Perm. Therefore, it is also not possible to explain such crimes by the negative influence of the social environment, as all these children grew up in different conditions and places with varying levels of crime. The majority of attackers did not have severe psychopathology. Out of 27 cases, only 23% had a history of seeking psychiatric help, and only 6% were deemed insane at the time of committing mass murders. At present, it is not possible to accurately identify a potential shooter based on external signs. It could be anyone.
All these children who later became criminals are entirely different individuals with different characters, different experiences, and different destinies.
20-year-old Adam Lanza blasted his way through the front door of the Sandy Hook Elementary School with an AR-15.
Nicholas Cruz in court Monday, the confessed school shooter never looking up.
So they thwarted 18-year-old Alex Yee's plans to shoot up his high school.
Despite some shooters studying violent materials before committing the crime, others did not. Some showed signs of depression, while others did not. Some underwent psychiatric treatment, while others did not. Some were bullied in school, while others were the aggressors themselves. So, it's impossible to confidently conclude that only a specific personality type is prone to such crimes. What made them cross the final moral line within themselves and commit such a terrible crime? What unites all these cases? The answer is both simple and complex at the same time. All these children fell victim to representatives of global anti-cultism and their meticulously planned info-terrorism acts. They were infected with destructive images of violent actions spread by representatives of anti-cultism through the media, containing hidden commands to act. That's why we see cases where teenagers are inspired to commit armed attacks by stories of terrorism. Essentially, school shootings are acts of terrorism. However, the form in which they occur allows the actual beneficiaries to divert attention away from themselves. Next, I will show you examples of how the well-honed manipulative psychological techniques from the arsenal of anti-cult terrorists influence the masses' consciousness.
The Columbine case. Let's consider, for example, the tragic events at Columbine High School.
911. Yeah, this is Sharon at Columbine High School. We have shots being fired. Okay. The guy is in a black trench coat. Jerry, there's one guy. They just shot somebody inside the cafeteria. I'm going to have to try and get out of here and call you back. Oh, God. Stay in the line with me. Oh, God. The gun is right outside the library door.
On April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School in Colorado, USA, a premeditated attack was carried out by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, senior students at the school. They attacked their classmates and school staff using guns and homemade bombs. As a result, 13 people were killed and 24 were wounded. After the attack, the shooters committed suicide.
They were getting shot all around me. They were shooting anyone of color wearing a white hat or playing a sport.
15 people are believed to have died here, 12 students.
This mass murder case caused significant public outcry in the United States and sparked heated debates about the need for stricter gun control. The incident led to the tightening of security systems in educational institutions and increased regulation of children's access to the internet and violent video games. Despite being known today as a case of mass murder, there is evidence from the perpetrators themselves that clearly characterizes their planned crime as a terrorist act. Long before their attack on the school, the future shooters frequently wrote in their journals about events such as the Oklahoma City bombing, the Vietnam War, and World War II. Journal entries also revealed that the attackers were planning a school bombing intended to rival the power of the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19, 1995. Prior to the events of September 11, 2001, this was the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. The bombing of a truck filled with explosives resulted in the deaths of 168 people, including 19 children under the age of 6, and injuries to over 680 people. Furthermore, in their writings about these events, the perpetrators expressed a desire to dwarf the carnage of the Oklahoma City bombing and leave a lasting impression on the world about these events.
So what really happened on that tragic day at Columbine High School? How do we interpret this event when, in fact, teenagers, impressed by stories of terrorist attacks and military actions, literally planned the next actual terrorist attack? It's not just murder or suicide. They planted a massive amount of explosives in the school and planned to detonate it. They planned to kill about 250 people, or even more, as they admitted in their diaries. The only thing that prevented them from carrying out their plans was that the homemade bombs didn't explode for some reason. And if the bombs had all gone off and they succeeded in what they had planned, how many children would have been harmed? How would law enforcement classify this crime then?
The fact that the teenagers planned the attack is evident from their deliberate choice of the attack date, which they called Judgment Day. Initially, the shooting was planned for April 19, 1999, the 6th anniversary of the end of the Waco siege and the 4th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. They postponed it to April 20th, only because they needed to secure additional ammunition. In other words, inspired by the Oklahoma City bombing, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold sought to commit an act of terror that would claim more lives than that explosion. In turn, the Oklahoma City bombing was linked to the events at Waco and was carried out on the 2nd anniversary of that tragedy. The perpetrator of the Oklahoma City bombing explained his actions as revenge against the federal government for its criminal actions, including those at Waco. Let's recall that back then, the members of the Branch Davidians religious group were surrounded and besieged by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the U.S. National Guard on the territory of their compound ranch Mount Carmel, near the city of Waco, Texas. The siege lasted from February 28 to April 19, 1993, and ended in tragic events during which a total of 86 people died. With a high probability, Eric and Dylan, like the rest of the country, watched the bloody events at Waco and the explosion in Oklahoma on television. Thus, the tragedy that resulted in the deaths of 86 people became the motive for another act of terror in which 168 people died. Both events, in turn, influenced 2 teenagers to attempt to surpass the terrorists' acts, culminating in the mass killings at Columbine High School.
So what really triggered the shootings at Columbine High School? The accumulated aggression of the children, which they couldn't cope with, or the media hype surrounding descriptions of high-profile terrorist attacks, containing specific destructive images and attitudes that incite action? What affected the children's psyche? And who is truly responsible for children becoming mass murderers? Now, these dates on the calendar, April 19th and 20, have become days of deep mourning for the entire American nation, marked by the shadow of 3 horrifying tragedies: the siege in Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the mass shooting at Columbine High School. The events of those days, which claimed numerous human lives, have become memorable milestones in American history. They have been the source of numerous changes in both the political and social landscape of the country.
But what unites all 3 tragedies is not just their dates and their impact on America, but also that they are all part of the strategy of global anti-cultism and the hidden force behind it.
They have become long-lasting anchor events that have triggered numerous processes, which continue to significantly influence the current situation in the country to this day. I will talk about this in more detail later, and also, using the specific example of the tragedy in Waco, I will show you how the enemy, through its network of global anti-cultism, orchestrates such events, and how you can identify its hidden hand amidst what may seem like chaos or accidental coincidence of circumstances.
Mechanisms of artificial provocation of school shooting incidents by anti-cult representatives.
All these events, besides being acts of terrorism, subsequently became powerful info-terrorist attacks, which in turn spawned new crimes. Later, through their allies in the mass media, representatives of anti-cultism launched a PR campaign to give worldwide publicity to the events at Columbine. Numerous high-profile articles were published, films were made, and books were written detailing the day of the attack down to what the boys had for breakfast that morning. All of this ultimately created a romanticized image of the shooters, evoking both sympathy and even admiration.
Ain't no V-Tech shit or Columbine, but I look like Bret Hart mixed with Dylan Klebo. Maybe what the pro.
I get this look up for you. Dude, I want you to know, like.
Shots fired. Several shots fired.
Based on the events at Columbine High School and the interests surrounding the shooters' personalities, entire communities of their admirers formed. Known as the Columbiners, fan groups emerged on social media, which ultimately became known as the Columbine movement. For some reason, competent authorities were slow to combat the spread of this clearly destructive information among teenagers and to stop the activities of such groups, despite their apparent efforts to popularize and romanticize school shootings and their perpetrators. As a result, what do we have now? Nowadays, school shootings and Columbine have become interchangeable terms. The word Columbine is now used to describe all crimes carried out in a similar manner. This marked the unofficial beginning of the era of school shootings. Who created this heroicized image of Columbine and why? Why did the authorities and intelligence agencies allow it to spread so widely? Is this simply negligence and irresponsibility, or intentional criminal inaction? If it is believed that one of the key reasons for new school shootings is an uncontrolled imitation of Columbine, then why was information popularizing this event allowed to spread so widely? If reports of these events did not contain hidden manipulations that incited action, this information would not have been so actively duplicated, picked up by other children, and would not have generated new shooters. It is evident that the Columbine cult was created intentionally. At its core, this is an act of informational terrorism that spawns more terrorist attacks. Who benefits from conducting acts of informational terrorism of this scale? Only the representatives of anti-cultism and the force behind them. it is the representatives of anti-cultism who subtly glorify the perpetrators of these attacks through the media. Using manipulative psychological techniques, they implant the desired image into people's subconscious minds, promoting the spread of information that contains hidden destructive messages.
The legacy of Columbine. Ever since that mayhem 15 years ago, we've seen more and more of these mass shootings, many by troubled young men inspired by the Columbine killers.
Police say Yee is obsessed with the Columbine High School massacre. David, tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of Columbine. Authorities clearly taking no chances.
This way, they search for new copycats. They sow the seeds of destruction and wait for new sprouts to emerge. When a school shooting occurs in any country, and the media worldwide starts broadcasting information about it, what happens to the people exposed to this information? Thousands of children and teenagers start to try on the image of the perpetrator, contemplating, what would I do if I were him? They think about how they would act towards their classmates in school or peers in college or university. Even many rational adults, listening to these stories in the media, start imagining how they might carry out such an act. In doing so, the human mind unwittingly identifies potential victims, those who have wronged them in the past or undervalued them. Thousands think about it, and a few actually turn their fantasies into reality. This is deliberate psychological manipulation. Many of you might wonder, if representatives of anti-cultism are behind school shootings, how do they manage to control the shooters remotely? They aren't physically holding their hands. The answer is simple. They don't need to physically hold anyone's hand to make them commit a mass shooting. They only need to control their consciousness. Naturally, the next question arises. If they use such precise and refined manipulative techniques, why do they not work on everyone? What is the key factor that opens the door for the implantation of a destructive program into the subconscious of teenagers, driving them to enact such horrific scenarios? To understand the true nature of what is happening, let's delve into the details of how representatives of anti-cultism use methods of covert programming to influence a person's subconscious to commit a school shooting. How do they manage to code a teenager to execute their malicious will?
Method of puzzle piece coding. First, representatives of anti-cultism select a region where, according to their goals and objectives, it will be strategically advantageous to create a school shooting incident. The organization and planning of such a terrorist act in the chosen region happen long before the actual event, usually from 1 to 3 years, depending on the significance and importance of the event for them. The coding of a teenager to carry out an armed attack is done remotely, using the method of subliminal information embedding through mass media and the internet. To create a new school shooting, they use a method of puzzle piece coding, that is, a method of covert manipulation by directing multiple waves of information coding. Each wave individually contains specific embedded messages that, like puzzle pieces, come together in the depths of the potential shooter's subconscious. Only when these pieces combine do they activate the program to commit mass murder. As a result of this activation, the individual goes through with the crime, while to an observer, it appears as if it was their personal decision. No one met with them, directly incited them, or helped them prepare. They didn't even discuss the topic with anyone. In reality, they act as a bio-robot, guided by a skilled hand to carry out a premeditated criminal plan. This segmentation of manipulative embeds into several waves of information delivery is intentional and serves the purpose of precise targeting. Since a school shooting requires one, at most 2 perpetrators, the waves of information coding affect thousands of people. Some of these people may even feel an impulse to act on the commands, but not everyone can cross the line into committing mass murder. Therefore, to narrow down the target zone and activate a suitable potential shooter, a cross-sectional information attack is conducted. It consists of several information deliveries, each containing specific embeds that can bypass the critical control of the conscious mind and penetrate directly into the subconscious. Once there, These embeds come together like a puzzle to form a cohesive picture of the future crime. This image becomes a dominant intrusive thought, pushing the individual towards committing mass murder. When planning the next school shooting, representatives of anti-cultism first study the demographics of the target school, their interests, and popular internet and media resources among them. Then, by placing materials on these media resources, considering trends in the teenage environment, they launch multiple waves of information coding that contain hidden embeds. Moreover, these infected messages are typically spaced out over time, meaning they don't necessarily need to be released into the information space simultaneously. The key is that they all superpose in the perception of a specific individual. Their combination in the potential shooter's subconscious triggers the command to execute the implanted program. The initial information coding attacks have a broad range of impact. The final wave of the attack and additional corrective measures are carried out directly within the target school. These give the start command to the shooter. Representatives of anti-cultism first launch preparatory waves of information coding, followed by targeting and activating waves. This series of precautionary measures allows them to control the exact number of perpetrators of a terrorist attack and the quality of its execution. The first preparatory wave, which serves as the foundation for the subsequent layering of all puzzle piece embeds into a single picture, is the glorification of previous school shooting perpetrators. The primary factor that representatives of anti-cultism exploit here is the human desire for fame.
Therefore, all the narratives glorifying shooters, implanted by representatives of anti-cultism, exploit a person's desire for popularity and widespread attention. It doesn't matter how the information about the shooters is spread. It could be condemning their actions or justifying them, a biographical sketch, or a dramatization of events. Anything goes. The critical aspect is the news coverage and the manipulative message embedded in it. Thus, an image of the criminal is created, surrounded by an aura of fame and admiration, despite the wrongfulness of their actions. What does a teenager see when they encounter this information? They see that an ordinary student, just like them, who felt undervalued, gained worldwide fame with a single act. Now, the top popular media write about them, celebrities talk about them, and they become a sort of idol for others. It is precisely the desire to become famous, the thirst for fame, that serves as the fertile ground in which the seeds of evil sown by real terrorists take root, provoking children to commit crimes.
My name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is at least 20 people with an AR-15 and a couple tracer rounds.
She is infatuated with Columbine's school shooting. Police say she was armed and extremely dangerous.
Well, I will be. Columbine, Virginia Tech, none of them will beat me. I'll kill them all.
Remember Columbine!
He was arrested. BC News investigation spanning the country uncovered chilling evidence, video diaries. Here's that Minnesota suspect talking to police in May.
My number one idol is Eric Harris.
An era of active shooter events really began with Columbine.
Thus, the first implant penetrates the subconscious of the potential shooter. The notion that the most important purpose in life is to gain fame and recognition, and without this, life is meaningless. The deep-seated subconscious fear of living an obscure life pushes the teenager toward committing the crime. If you look at the profiles of shooters from this perspective, and their explanations for their actions, you will clearly see that the desire to become famous is the one common trait they all share. Here is a crucial point. If the glorified image of the shooter did not exist, school shootings would cease to be possible, because without this foundational base, the rest of the program for carrying out the act would not have the necessary support to be executed.
The dissemination of glorified images of criminals as bait for those who also crave popularity acts as a filter, screening out those unsuitable for the role of perpetrator, and infecting those with the active trigger that sets off the program's unpacking. Another filter is the specific method of selecting themes through which the program components for executing a school shooting are embedded. These themes are chosen from the areas of interest to teenagers, which are typically opposite in nature. What does this mean, and why is it done? A person is more likely to be interested in related topics. For example, someone interested in astronautics might also be interested in parachuting. However, to minimize the number of people caught in the cross-section of the informational coding waves, topics are chosen that rarely fall within the sphere of interest of the same person all at once. For instance, a teenager might be fascinated by space and the possibility of life on other planets, such as astrobiology. What would be opposite in nature to this interest? Life's opposite is death. So, a teenager potentially suitable for the role of a shooter might also be interested in different models of weapons. This combination of interests is rare in real life, which is precisely what anti-cultism representatives count on. Subsequently, various materials on these themes are embedded with other components of the single program for carrying out a school shooting. Particular emphasis is placed on awakening an interest in weapons as tools that grant power and fame. As a result, only those teenagers who are simultaneously interested in both opposing themes and who already have a dominant desire for fame and recognition fall into the crosshairs of these intersecting waves of information coding. Thus, the target group gradually narrows down through the final stage of the coding process. The first wave of information coding affects thousands. Then from these thousands, only hundreds remain, and ultimately, only a few individuals are caught in the crossfire of all the necessary coding waves. It then becomes a matter of time to see who among them activates first, and who ultimately becomes the perpetrator of the implanted program. This is why shooters often appear entirely different from one another, with diametrically opposed personality traits, frequently without significant psychological issues, and most importantly, without apparent motives for committing such crimes.
Let me give you an example of an inducing wave of information coding that activates a teenager's program to commit a school shooting. The start command doesn't necessarily come through the media or the internet. It could be delivered by a guest lecturer at the school who incidentally mentions a person in their talk who dedicated their entire life to science but never gained worldwide recognition or fame. In contrast, the lecturer then cites Nobel laureates as examples, few in number, but they were able to achieve success. What embed does the potential shooter receive here? Their subconscious gets the directive that neither science nor diligent effort brings fame, and that life's meaning isn't in discoveries or hard work, but in popularity. For if no one knows you, you're wasting your life. Therefore, there's no point to your existence. From an outside perspective, such a lecture might seem noble, yet it serves as the trigger for activating the shooter. After a short period, one of the students at this school will commit an armed attack on others. Several months may pass between the lecture and the tragic event, by which time no one will remember or connect the person to the reasons for this tragedy. From a legal standpoint, there's no grounds for charges of incitement because the lecturer didn't even mention school shootings in their talk. In this way, through purposeful information coding, the subconscious program for committing mass murder is activated in the teenager unnoticed by others. Thus, out of thousands of teenagers affected by intersecting waves of information coding, only a few become future shooters. This transformation occurs only in schools where the final stage of subconscious programming, the activation phase of the embedded command, has been completed. That's why, seemingly out of nowhere, children develop an attraction to weapons and a desire to inflict harm on others. Just an image that bypassed the critical perception of the conscious mind, penetrated deep into the subconscious, and triggered action. As a result, a teenager who recently made plans for the future dreamed of romantic relationships and chose a university or college to attend after school. Suddenly, with the obsession of a psychopath, starts planning a real terrorist attack. Thus, cynically and cold-bloodedly, representatives of anti-cultism skillfully manipulate the pliable minds of future executors for their malicious intent. They turn your children into terrorists and mass murderers. Even if only one out of hundreds of thousands of children brings this image to life, it is more than enough for representatives of anti-cultism. and the force behind them to continue their destructive activities to destabilize society and impose the agendas that benefit them. Representatives of anti-cultism, in their public statements, which they also make in educational institutions, often talk about their concern for the safety of children. However, it is they themselves who are the secret instigators, provoking children to display outbursts of hatred, intolerance, and aggression. It is the representatives of anti-cultism who create conditions in society for children, and sometimes even adults, to take up arms and go shoot other children in schools. Being terrorists themselves, they breed new terrorists. Thus, through the hands of others, they achieve the desired results.
Ways to prevent school shootings.
Understanding the fundamental principles of manipulative techniques through which the search and activation of potential shooters occur also provides the opportunity to identify the organizers of such crimes and prevent similar incidents in the future. How to prevent school shootings.
Method 1. Monitoring content leading to crime. For example, by tracking the content that teenagers who commit mass shootings have been exposed to, it is possible to uncover those who led them to these actions, using them as remotely controlled weapons. This includes identifying specific publications, harmful content, and even particular media channels through which children are encoded to commit school shootings. It is worth noting that identifying potentially harmful content in this case is possible only through its external features. Without specialized knowledge of the puzzle coding method, an ordinary person will not be able to detect hidden puzzle embeds in text or video materials, which ultimately transform someone into a shooter. Since this method is designed to influence a person's subconsciousness, bypassing critical perception by the conscious mind, it's logical that it is almost impossible to understand where and how these embeds occur if you use consciousness alone. But what can be noticed, and what should be paid attention to when identifying dangerous content? Since heroization of shooters is the first and fundamental wave of information coding, which lays the groundwork in a person's subconsciousness for committing a future crime, we will now provide an analysis of publications on the topic of school shootings. The first thing to observe in these materials is the frequency of publications that repeat the same seemingly meaningless messages. This may be a series of similar articles about a specific school shooting incident that happened a long time ago. Often, these articles are authored by a specific periodical, journalist, or a group of interconnected journalists who continually maintain the same topics in their publications over an extended period of time. Meanwhile, other journalists or media outlets may have already stopped covering this event long ago. Yet this very group of journalists persistently supports the information wave for unknown reasons, and keeps the long-past event alive in the media space. These articles would repeatedly discuss the same subject from different angles. The authors might criticize the police, express sympathy for the shooter's parents, highlight recently uncovered details of the crime, and so on. However, the common thread will still be the same: school shootings. And all these articles will have one significant feature: they will never harshly criticize or condemn the shooter. The second feature of potentially dangerous materials and publications is that discussions of school shootings would always be accompanied by direct or indirect criticism of the authorities, specific officials, and the helplessness of law enforcement agencies. Articles would discuss their mistakes and failures, emphasizing that law enforcement officers lie and deliberately distort facts to cover up their own helplessness. Such publications often appear very similar, and at first glance may even seem reasonable, devoid of aggressive calls to action or clear signs of inciting hatred. However, in reality, the information they contain deeply affects people, leaving a lasting imprint on their subconsciousness. The third feature to watch for is the presence of numbers in the publications. Information containing hidden embeds always includes a numerical code. This could be mentions of dates, exact time when a crime was committed, the number of casualties, or other figures. Yet these numbers would be repeatedly referenced in their publications. The point is that human consciousness and subconsciousness perceive numbers differently. This feature of the work of our subconsciousness is leveraged by the puzzle coding method. As mentioned before, it is extremely challenging for an unprepared individual to detect hidden manipulations of consciousness, and, even more so, subconsciousness, through the puzzle coding method without specialized training. However, there is always a pattern, and identifying this pattern can help pinpoint particularly dangerous content amid the vast flow of information. Once sources of destructive influence containing hidden embeds are identified, it is crucial to promptly halt the propagation of their influence on the broader population. Method 2. Conducting psychological testing in schools to identify increased levels of bipolar disorders. One indicator that students at a particular educational institution have been subjected to hidden external subconscious manipulation is an increase in cases of bipolar affective disorder among them. What's the connection here? Since the initial waves of information coding have a wide radius of impact, certain embeds, parts of the program for mass shootings, infiltrate the subconscious of all affected individuals. What happens to a person in this case? Hidden directives start acting in their subconscious, conflicting with their conscious goals and aspirations. As a result, internal conflict and resistance emerge within the individual. This conflict, triggered by the implanting of foreign elements into the subconscious, eventually manifests as bipolar disorder. Representatives of anti-cultism cannot avoid provoking such conditions when they initiate preparatory waves of coding for school shootings, because this forms the foundation for further imposition of other waves, ultimately launching the program. An illustrative example in this regard is the situation in the Czech Republic, where after the shooting incident at the Faculty of Philosophy of Charles University in Prague in 2023, pertinent information emerged regarding the prevalence of bipolar disorders among the country's young generation. Czech media began disseminating information indicating that approximately 5% of the entire population of the Czech Republic currently suffers from bipolar affective disorder, primarily among the young generation of the Czech shooter's age, namely students. Students of Charles University themselves posted on social media, expressing concern about a troubling trend. Every second student suffers from bipolar affective disorder. This circumstance confirms the fact of external manipulative interference in the subconscious minds of this university's students. As of today, the Czech Republic, particularly its capital, is a hotspot of anti-cult activity. One of the key centers of their activity is located precisely in Prague, and one of the leaders of the local anti-cult movement, Zdeněk Vojtěšek, teaches at the Hussite Theological Faculty of Charles University. Consequently, there are grounds to presume that a thorough analysis of the public activities of anti-cult groups might help establish a correlation between their activities and the increase in cases of bipolar disorders among Czech youth. A deep study of this relationship may ultimately provide compelling evidence that anti-cult organizations are not only linked to school shooting incidents, but are indeed their perpetrators. In fact, shooters are just as much victims of anti-cultists as those they shoot at. Their actions were controlled not by themselves, but by a program embedded in their subconscious. An unprepared person is powerless against such subconscious intervention. Therefore, these children simply found themselves helpless against the external malevolent influence of manipulators. Hence, there should be a pressing discussion about the necessity of banning members of anti-cult organizations from educational institutions, as they may exert covert destructive influence on children. The shooting incident in Prague has prompted Czech students to speak out about the widespread rise of bipolar disorders and seek help. A petition was drawn up urging the Czech government and politicians not to ignore the issue, and to strengthen psychological and psychiatric assistance for all those in need. The petition was signed by over 600 people. This means that the young people themselves are frightened by this situation. Subconsciously, they feel that someone is manipulating their minds, and they fear that anyone among them could be the next to pick up a weapon to harm oneself or others. A similar scenario following school shooting incidents will be observed in all schools that have been targeted by the information coding attacks of anti-cult representatives.
The situation in the Czech Republic clearly demonstrates that bipolar disorder is an inherent and natural accompanying factor in external interventions aimed at programming the subconscious of individuals. If monitoring of educational institutions in other countries is carried out, it will be possible to reveal hotspots of increasing bipolar affective disorders, that is, places already targeted by anti-cultists, where terror attacks are planned in the near future. Typically, in schools and universities where mass shootings have occurred, significantly more students with bipolar disorder can be identified compared to the average statistical rate. Moreover, if these educational institutions conducted regular psychological testing of students, it would reveal that the rapid increase in bipolar disorders occurred precisely within the range of 1 to 3 years before the crime committed by one of their students at that school or university. This period aligns with the initial preparatory waves of information on coding. The strongest impact from the implanted destructive program will be felt by the future shooter themselves. However, once they carry out the act, bipolar disorder will disappear because the cause triggering the internal conflict disappears. The person makes a final choice. Therefore, typically, after committing the crime, this issue is not diagnosed in most shooters. However, it persists in other students at the school. An experienced psychologist only needs to check students for bipolar affective disorder to determine whether these children have been subjected to attempts of external interference in their subconscious. Furthermore, if educational institutions introduce regular psychological testing practices, for example, every 6 months, any alarming trends can be detected in time to take preventive measures. Enhanced security measures in schools, such as metal detectors at entrances, are certainly important and necessary for protection. However, unfortunately, they are not capable of stopping the infiltration of malignant information programs into the subconscious minds of students. Therefore, it is crucial for school psychologists and parents to closely monitor the psychological well-being of children. In particular, attention should be paid to important markers, such as the development of bipolar disorder. Children themselves are likely to attempt to conceal these conditions because they are frightened by them, often not realizing that these states are artificial and induced by remote information coding through media and internet content they encounter. Thus, a simple factor like caring for the psychological welfare of children and implementing diagnostic procedures to detect bipolar affective disorder is an essential element in preventing tragic events.
The third method for preventing armed attacks in educational institutions: monitoring the country's information field. Another marker that may indicate the preparation site for future crime is the uneven dissemination of information about new cases of school shootings. When a high-profile armed attack occurs at an educational institution with a large number of casualties, it naturally resonates widely in society, and the news wave covers the entire country. Initially, the information erupts like a wildfire, but over time, its intensity diminishes. However, if representatives of anti-cultism have already planned a similar attack in a specific region, the informational echo of this event will resonate longer and louder here than in other regions of the country. Alternatively, information about it may be reactivated in the information field after the news wave subsides. It is important to note here that the names and images of the criminals continue to appear in the news, remaining in the information field of the region or city. This leads to a covert heroization of the shooters, with the key embed spreading that humanity will remember them for life. This phenomenon is a red flag for vigilant observers. If you notice such a trend in your city, be vigilant. The dissemination of a heroized image of shooters is the first preparatory wave of information coding, and a fundamental implant on which the future behavior of the shooter is built. If somewhere this image is artificially sustained in the information space, it means that the psychological indoctrination of the next shooter has already begun in one of the schools in this region. At the same time, conducting psychological testing across educational institutions in the city to detect a sudden increase in the number of bipolar disorders can with a high probability identify the school or university where representatives of anti-cultism have planned the next case of school shooting.
People must also be informed about how to recognize manipulative techniques and how to train their minds not to succumb to covert influences. The most effective measure to prevent school shootings is the complete cessation of the activities of the entire network of global anti-cultism. Everyone who is behind organizing such crimes and programming people to carry them out.
School shooting is a controlled process. The fact that seemingly uncontrolled school shootings are actually a controlled process is evidenced by statistics and chronology of their spread. To gain a more detailed understanding of this trend, let's analyze the incidence and growth of the number of such crimes in various countries where they have occurred. School shootings in Russia. For quite a long time, no evidence of cases of mass shootings in schools has surfaced in Russia. In the 1990s, only one such crime was widely known: the incident at the Kamyshin Cadet School in 1997. The first armed attack on an educational institution in Russia, which resulted in fatalities, is considered to be the shooting at Moscow School No. 263 in February 2014, and the first instance of a school shooting following the so-called Columbine scenario occurred in 2017 in Ivantevka.
What can explain the sudden appearance of a phenomenon such as school shootings in a territory where it was previously uncommon? How can it be explained other than by outside interference? After all, what has changed in Russia since the times when such crimes were unheard of? What has changed is that anti-cultism has gained unprecedented power and influence here. Today, Russian media deliberately spreads the narrative that the cause of mass school shootings in Russia is the influence of similar incidents in the United States. To implant this idea in the masses, the same image of such a crime, Columbine, is most often used. In news reports about school shootings in Russia, you will frequently find a parallel drawn specifically with the Columbine case.
What happened at the Moscow school is being called the American scenario by the Russian press. Incidents like this do indeed happen often in the U.S.
School shootings are common in the U.S., but not in Russia.
Shootings and hostage situations are indeed not uncommon in American schools. A student or former student with a rifle in hand, that's the typical anti-hero of local news.
However, as I mentioned earlier, the first instance of such supposed imitation in Russia occurred in 2017, 18 years after the Columbine events. Why did it take so long for the first imitator to appear in Russia? The answer is simple. Because it's not just imitation. Someone allowed this precedent to happen in Russia and ensured it received widespread publicity. Some Russian propaganda figures, authors, and proponents of the theory alleging the harmful influence of the USA on school shootings in Russia claim that these incidents are characterized by organized activity, supposedly initiated by the US. This argument is supported by a simple propaganda narrative. It is so because historically, the US has always been opposed to Russia on the geopolitical stage. Therefore, America is an enemy, and in this way, the enemy is attacking Russia. However, logically thinking, it is the United States itself that suffers much more from school shootings. Why? Why would they attack themselves? It would be more logical to assume that America suffers the most precisely because its adversaries subject it to massive and regular attacks. The truth is that both the American and Russian peoples are subjected to cynical and sophisticated attacks from their common enemy, global anti-cultism. By trying to divert attention and shift all the blame onto the allegedly bad example set by the United States, the hidden shadow force, who is the ideological mastermind of anti-cultism and terrorism, intended to create a visible image of an enemy, obscuring its own tracks behind mass shootings in both Russia and America, behind the Columbine tragedy and the phenomenon of school shootings as a whole. Today, the threat of school shootings in Russia has become a serious societal issue.
At least 13 people are dead, including at least 7 children, after a shooting at a school in central Russia.
In Russia, a gunman killed at least 15 people at a school today, 11 of them children.
Close the door. Some shooting! I hope they'll shoot him.
Hey, buddy, hang in there.
Hold on a bit, okay?
We'll tie it up quickly.
Guys, it's a complete mess. I'm done. I'm in Perm State University. It's a complete mess here. The situation right now is people are being loaded into ambulances. There are the wounded everywhere. I wanted to get my child out, but the best thing for them now is to barricade. They're there.
To explain how this phenomenon suddenly emerged and began to progress, one needs to trace the consequences these terrorist acts brought to the country. What was the political situation at the time of the attack? What changes did this event provoke in that situation? What laws were passed after each new high-profile case? And who ultimately benefited from this, implementing their selfish goals under the guise of a loud news break? Then it becomes evident that the reason for the emergence of school shootings in Russia is not spontaneous copycats. It is simply that the force behind anti-cultism has decided to use this tool of terror now on Russian soil as well. Another confirmation that school shootings are not accidental is the geography of these attacks. Notice that there are specific countries, like the United States, that regularly suffer from school shootings. Then, there are countries where this phenomenon is gaining momentum, like Russia, and there are countries where only isolated incidents have occurred without subsequent recurrences, such as Canada or some European countries.
Breaking news out of Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says 5 people have been killed, 2 more are in critical condition after a school shooting.
A 14-year-old boy has shot dead 8 children at a school in Serbia.
These cases generally did not receive widespread media coverage or gain worldwide notoriety. Many of you, I am sure, are hearing about these incidents for the first time today. And then there are other countries with a myriad of social problems and factors that seem likely to provoke such incidents. Yet, they have never experienced a single school shooting. It's as if some invisible force is protecting them from this. Suppose the cause of school shootings is presumably the uncontrolled imitation of shooters by teenagers. Why does this principle not apply in these countries? This simply indicates that either the representatives of anti-cultism do not yet have their levers of influence in these countries, or it is not yet advantageous for them to carry out such attacks there. However, this does not guarantee that these countries' populations are protected from such crimes. A vivid example is the previously mentioned mass shooting incident in the Czech Republic in 2023.
Breaking news out of Prague, where police say 15 people are dead and dozens injured after a shooting at Charles University. The gunman.
This event occurred during a period of growing dissatisfaction among the population with the political situation in the country and an economic crisis caused by sanctions imposed by the Czech Republic against Russia. Notably, in this situation, the media began actively circulating information that the Czech shooter allegedly cited as his motivation the example of a female shooter from Russia who had carried out an armed attack at a school just a few weeks before these events. Such a confluence of circumstances suggests that the attack in the Czech Republic was not coincidentally carried out at this particular time, nor was the reference to Russia as the inspiration for the crime accidental. It appears that someone wanted to exploit the situation for their own interests. If we examine each such attack closely, we can see that these events always correlate with the political situation in the victim country. For example, they often coincide with upcoming elections, important international negotiations, escalating political tensions within the country, growing public dissatisfaction with the government, and so on. Such events often become significant and high-profile news stories that overshadow other news. During this period, when public attention is focused on the tragedy, anti-cult representatives and the forces behind them can quietly carry out actions they would prefer to keep out of the public eye. Are these coincidences or someone's cold calculation? The most telling evidence of the planned nature of these attacks is their influence both on the life of a single country and on the global community. Each school shooting brings about a series of political and social transformations directed by anti-cult representatives to serve their interests. This leads to significant changes within the state and irreversibly affects the lives of its people. Even one such event leaves an unhealing, bleeding wound on the heart of the entire society. Primarily, such terrorist attacks target parents and all those with children. After all, a terror attack where one child kills other children causes immense shock and upheaval in society. It strikes at the most vulnerable place in every parent, for their life.
Waited hours to be told our daughter would never come home.
The sensationalized details of school shootings spread through the media create a powerful internal fear in people, creating a pervasive sense of constant threat to the lives of their children.
There's no place that's safe anymore, and our public schools should be the safest.
Everyone who's a parent feels that.
This makes no sense. This is impossible. My girl, my 14-year-old baby, I sent her to school yesterday. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead.
We don't feel safe, and we want it to be addressed.
Schools are not safe anymore.
At the same time, a clear belief forms among the population: the government cannot protect our children.
How dare you? You were paid by them, and you just came out and, what was that, a deposition?
I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences.
Therefore, with each new incident, distrust and dissatisfaction with the authorities will only increase.
This is America. We were supposed to be able to do things and be the people we wanted to be, and now we are in a crazy place.
Since we survived a mass shooting in July, I have met with over 130 lawmakers. How is this still happening? How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them?
How do we allow a gunman to come into our children's school? How do they get through security? What security is there? There's no metal detectors. The gunman, a crazy person, just walks right into the school, knocks down the window of my child's door, and starts shooting her.
In the eyes of frightened parents, the authorities are guilty of failing to ensure their children's safety. They are guilty of allowing their children to live in a state that is rotting from within, where their child could become a victim at any moment or even turn into a perpetrator. This subconscious understanding causes feelings of apathy, hopelessness, and hatred towards the current authorities, skillfully inflamed by anti-cult representatives.
This doesn't happen in other countries. It happens in the United States of America.
You've got a beautiful country, you've got beautiful people, but what's the problem? Guns. How does a 7-year-old have a gun?
I'm very angry that this happened, because it keeps happening.
These children survived. This is the shrill screaming of kids trying to get out while their classmates are being murdered.
The The phenomenon is that people are artificially instilled with hatred towards any authority in general. Conditions are created that show people that no matter who they elect or place in power, nothing changes. Thus, the belief that all authority is evil becomes firmly rooted in the public consciousness. This process creates a vicious cycle. Artificially induced and maintained fear drives part of the population to demand stricter measures and tougher laws from the authorities. However, these initially well-intentioned initiatives that were supposed to prevent new crimes are subsequently used by anti-cult representatives and their accomplices within state structures against the people themselves. This results in greater subjugation of the populace, increased control over citizens' lives, and the suppression of free speech. Thus, people are gradually stripped of their last rights and freedoms. As a consequence, a previously democratic country moves closer to a totalitarian regime. But at the same time, while one part of the population, driven by fear, advocates for stricter measures, another part, driven by hatred towards the authorities, believes that such authoritarian methods will lead to even greater restrictions on their freedoms and violations of their rights.
Students, parents, and activists gathered outside Tennessee State's Capitol to protest gun violence.
The government would just do something to keep people from getting guns they don't need. It's unnecessary.
To change who is in government.
Wrong-headed leaders who prioritize guns over children.
My gun sits right here on my side and doesn't jump out and shoot anybody.
Gun violence in a school that allows teachers to carry guns? You think more guns lead to more death?
The main point in this situation is that anti-cult representatives, through precise and sophisticated manipulations, artificially destabilize and divide society. This causes a split into two opposing camps. Thus, a large mass of people forms who hate the authorities and hate each other. What will this lead to? Unrest, protests, and confrontation. All of this collectively puts the country on the brink of civil war. And this is precisely the final point to which global anti-cultism and the hidden shadow force behind it are currently leading America. This is why mass shootings in schools occur so frequently in the United States. This process is planned and controlled. It is part of the enemy's strategy aimed at destroying democracy, first in the US, and then throughout the world. It is a complex but highly effective scheme carried out by global anti-cult representatives right before the world's eyes, yet unnoticed by anyone. It's worth adding that despite the apparent chaos in the spread of news about these incidents or narratives glorifying the shooters, anti-cult representatives carefully ensure that the information tainted with their manipulative virus is delivered precisely and in measured doses. This is to prevent school attacks from becoming too widespread. Excessive numbers of such crimes would diminish their impact, and each subsequent incident would no longer provoke such a strong societal reaction. People are capable of becoming accustomed to anything, even such horrific events. If school shootings happen too frequently, society will eventually adapt. While these events will still induce fear, the constant internal anxiety and worry will diminish. People will remain cautious, but not much more. On the other hand, measured instances of crime open people's minds to the implantation of negatively acting images that go straight into the subconscious, which most people today cannot defend against. Statistics are stubborn things, and they speak for themselves. These attacks' periodicity and growth trends clearly point to the hidden organizers behind this phenomenon. The situation in the US is particularly alarming. with a rapid increase in school shootings carrying a hidden warning sign. Initially, anti-cult representatives provoked isolated incidents of school shootings, which had a massive impact not only on America, but on the entire world.
School shooting. School shooting.
School shooting.
High school shooting. School shooting.
These events were like bombs going off because, at the time, children shooting other children was an extraordinary occurrence that caused profound shock in society. Thus, the early incidents of school shootings in the U.S. became very loud informational terrorist attacks, shocking the whole world. The Columbine High School massacre alone had tragic repercussions for many, spawning new school shootings and significantly bolstering the influence of anti-cultism in the U.S. Now, look at what's happening in America today. The graphs showing the number of mass school shootings indicate a sharp increase. What does this signify? Due to the special role the U.S. plays in the hidden enemy's plans, it suggests that the upcoming events they have planned can lead to increased tension inside the country by using school shootings as acts of informational terrorism and deploying various psychological and informational terrorist attacks through its numerous tentacles. This hidden force is preparing the ground for a future civil war. Therefore, people need to be aware of the methods the enemy employs through the global anti-cult network and the threats they pose. Only this way can people extricate themselves from the manipulative game into which anti-cult representatives have drawn them. It's crucial to recognize that no measures, no matter how strict, will eradicate the root cause of school shootings as long as the source of these terrorist attacks exists and there is someone to give the command start. After all, similar measures have already been taken in different countries around the world, which aligns with the goals of representatives of anti-cultism. However, practice has shown that neither the prospect of the death penalty, increased school security, nor restrictions on firearm purchases have reduced the incidence of school shootings. Even if a total ban on civilian gun ownership were enacted, future attacks will occur in other forms, such as homemade bombs, melee weapons, or poison gas. Similarly, the introduction of censorship on social networks and other additional measures to control youth behavior have also proven ineffective. Ultimately, all of this has only led to significant infringements on citizens' rights and freedoms and undermining democracy without reducing the number of school shootings, let alone eliminating them, because all the strictest measures and restrictive laws enacted in response to these incidents are often initiated and implemented by global anti-cult representatives and their accomplices within politics, the state apparatus, the judiciary, and law enforcement. Therefore, a priori, they will always be designed to work against people and democracy. This chain of evil will not end, and children will continue to suffer and die as long as global anti-cultism exists and its representatives can freely use their hidden manipulative techniques to influence people's minds and conduct acts of informational terrorism through the media.
School shootings are the plague of the 21st century, and the source of this plague is global anti-cultism and the hidden enemy of humanity behind it. It is the creation of a force that skillfully manipulates images and has chosen terrorism as its primary weapon. They are responsible for creating this disease. They cultivate and sustain it. We can only defeat this disease when the true spreaders, all the perpetrators and organizers of these crimes, are held accountable and answer before all of humanity for their atrocities.
If anyone still doubts that representatives of anti-cultism are behind mass school shootings, let me give you a specific example. The details of the events I am about to discuss directly point to the original culprits of the Columbine High School massacre and the ideological architects of the phenomenon of school shootings as a whole.